All right, guys, I'm going to do one of my late night presentations. I felt inspired by this presentation. I was just doing a Grok and ChatGPT conversation, and I put together all these things in a bunch of slides. And I'm going to be talking about AI. I'm going to be talking about the US debt, and I am going to be talking about, of course, Bitcoin. So the conclusion is the puncher headline here. AI is the only thing that matters. Okay. So what do I mean by that? I mean, Elon recently posted this. He's, for the last 3 days, he's been on this rampage, sort of anti-Trump, anti-deficit spending. I tried with Doge, and they totally ignored me, and that is he's showing charts like this. He's reposting charts like this, where you have this sort of curve that it looks like it's going into Weimar Germany, and it looks bad. I got to tell you, and my friend Larry Lepard wrote this book called The Big Print, very sort of sensationalist title. I like the book. I do think there will be a big print, but I think it's very important to understand the magnitude of this. And, we had a very, very interesting discussion yesterday, which you can listen to that space between Tom Young, I was there, of course, and then Joe Carlasale, who I got to tell you, he's one smart guy, and Mike Alfred, an asteroid. And so it was one of the better discussions. And it kind of really pushed me to go back to the drawing board and really look at the numbers. So, you look at these graphs like this, and you're like, this is unsustainable. We're just going to go completely bankrupt. We're going to be eating, pork and beans out of canned food, and everything's going to stop working. And Elon is engagement farming on his own app right now. And this is kind of what we're saying. So is this the accurate picture? Well, I would say no. And why do I say no? I say no because the real picture is this. It's an 8% curve. Okay. That's what's actually happening. U.S. debt is growing at 8% a year. Now, some periods it grew a little faster than 8%. Right after, 2010, there was this sort of growth in debt, right? Because we sort of launched all these QE things in the 2008 and 2009, and growth kind of went up, and then it sort of slowed down a little bit. It went under trend a little bit, the debt. And then, of course, COVID hit in 2020, and then we picked right back up to the 8% level. But, we're growing at 8% a year. It's a pretty smooth growth curve. Now, you're still like, well, we're we're smoothly going off a cliff. That's what it looks like. And, that is kind of accurate. That is, but why do we have such a curve? Why is it growing at 8%? And the reason it's growing at 8% is we all know as Bitcoiners, money supply is growing. How fast is money supply growing? Well, it's growing exactly at 8%. So, I mean, honestly, if you plot these things, it's exact curve of 8%. That is exactly what is happening. And, it did grow a little faster than that, right around the 70s and stuff. But since 2000, the last 25 years, it's been growing at 8%. And, that's a lot faster than kind of nominal inflation. So, but, asset prices have also been growing at about 8%. So if you're looking at, super high-end real estate, art, oceanside property, like Michael Saylor's house in Palm Beach, or Miami, or you look at high-end art, or you look at gold. All these things are growing at about 8%, right? And why is it growing faster than inflation? A very simple reason is you can't, this is going predominantly to the top 1%, but let's just call it the top 10% of the population. And, they can't actually spend it, right? And if you look at people who are, let's just say worth over $10 million, they're not, and they can't actually spend the money. Now, what they can do is they can spend it on a second home. They can spend it on, buying some gold or buying some stock. But typically, if they get this money print in their pocket, they will spend it by buying an asset, like, a house or a bigger house, or some stock. And they won't spend it by buying, just going out to restaurants more. They're going to go out to the restaurants at the same rate. They might buy a slightly better car, but they're not really going to spend it on inflation. They're going to be spending it on assets. So that's why asset prices are growing up faster than consumer prices. And so this is sort of a delicate balance, but that's kind of where it is. Now, Bitcoin is, of course, growing at much faster rate than 8%. It's growing at like 44% right now. And, you can model it pretty carefully as a power curve. I like the term power curve, which is Matthew Mashinsky's term, because it avoids the law, the power law terminology and controversy. So the power curve, I think, is a great way to discuss it. But the power curve, British HODL, of course, will say the power opinion, but that's just because he wants to engage a little bit, and he's sort of mathematically a little challenged. But Bitcoin's growing, let's say, at somewhere between 44 and 30, going down 10 years out to 34%. And, if you look at, Bitcoin, if you're a Bitcoiner, you don't care about the debt because, you don't care about the money printing because 8% doesn't matter to you. You're going to go up 25x in the next decade if you just hold Bitcoin. 2.5 million, something like that. You do not care about 8%. People are always, but what will my dollar buy you? Well, it'll buy you about half. That's what it'll do, because 8% over 10 years means it's about half. 7.2 means it's about the halves in 10 years, a little bit more than 2x, but not much more, right? And so that's Bitcoin, right? But now, and this really can explain pretty much the whole S&P 500. So this graph heard. I want to say Raoul Pal kind of helped really push this idea, and I really credit him. But basically, the entire S&P 500 can be explained as it can really be explained as just debt. Just money supply printing. But basically, if you kind of cut out money supply, the S&P 500 doesn't grow at all. Right? So it's purely a monetary phenomena. And we have the top Mag 7, the top 7 or 10 stocks, which are providing all the real return of the S&P 500, right? The S&P 500 in and of itself, like these waste management type companies and stuff, that they're growing actually even less than the money printing. So the whole thing is due to these tech companies in America, really. And that's why stocks in Europe haven't done very well, because they don't have the tech companies. So really, we have this explanation of stocks being pretty much determined by money printer. Now, there's a new kid in town, however. So remember this graph, Bitcoin completely dominating the US debt. Well, what about this new kid? The new kid is AI. And AI is currently growing anywhere from 80% to 100% per year. And you can measure that in a bunch of different ways. Compute power is sort of the best way, but it's almost not measurable, right? Because you're measuring intelligence. And there are some ways of kind of measuring, but let's just say 80% to 100%. What does that look like? Well, it looks like this. It means that in the next 10 years, we're probably going to get something like a 350x in compute power. Now, 350x kind of completely dwarfs the 25x that Bitcoin is going to produce. And it completely dwarfs the 2x that the US debt's going to go up. So it really means that the only thing you're going to really have to care about in the next 10 years is AI. Now, you personally are going to have to care about Bitcoin, because if you're just sitting in bonds, you're probably going to lose half your money. If you're in Bitcoin, you're going to make probably after tax about 10 times your money. But the whole world is changing at a 350 rate, right, because of AI. So that's the big picture. That's the higher order bit that you really have to think about, is this AI growth, which is just tremendous. Now, last chart is, what does this look like over the next 20 years? Well, AI is not showing any signs of slowing down. So it's probably going to grow at something like 80 to 100% for the next 20 years. We're in that phase. And what does that mean? Well, that means that we could be growing 100,000 times in its compute power. 100,000 times. in the next 20 years. And, you know, I just don't think our human brains are capable of comprehending that. If we have 100,000 growth in AI and robotics and drones, and we are going to have super intelligence by this point. We are going to have robots at every home. We're going to have super intelligent robots. This is going to be the complete game changer. That's kind of why I go back, when I go back to my title, which is AI is the only thing that matters. Elon, I'm sorry, which is amazing to me because Elon's probably one of the top 3 people or 5 people in the world uh, who understands AI. But, he's completely focused, like all humans, on his own ego. And I think his own ego is you stop me from doing what I want to do at Doge. So, he now is pushing these kind of things like this. But, at the end of the day, that is the only chart that matters. And really, that's the only chart that matters the next 20 years. So I think, in conclusion, I would like to say, we have these kind of mental models of how we're going to run out of money, or we're going to get poor, we're going to eat out of cans, all this stuff. But if we look at this kind of number and we say, wait a second, we've got this new technology. It's going to grow. It's going to grow us 100,000x over the next 20 years. This is not like the Industrial Revolution. This is like a completely once in a humanity species thing that is happening to us, and we're just lucky enough to live through this. So, anyways, that is my presentation for tonight. Let's just see if anybody's in the chat room. Not really. Caspa fixes this. No, Caspa does not fix this. It's pretty amazing to me that you see a chart like this and you bring up Caspa. No, Caspa does not matter. Even Bitcoin kind of doesn't matter in the greater scheme of things relative to what we're saying here. Okay. Anyways, I hope you've enjoyed my presentation. I'm going to go back to sleep, and maybe I'll do another space or something early tomorrow or this morning.